In the continent of Edinburgh, the neighboring villages of Moria and Salta were at war. For 100 years, this land could not sustain a single life. This barren plain used to be a place of great importance, however. Rubain, a vast empire boasting overwhelming power that cast a large shadow over the entire continent, but suddenly vanished without a trace, leaving behind a desolate wasteland save for the few villages along its outskirts. Nothing remained except for the Grand Bilyana tree that the Morians worship, while sultans claim it sucks the vitality out of the surrounding land that looms over the once great kingdom. Young Darius had always been marked by the accursed Crest that most considered to bring misfortune to all besides the bearer. Even as a child, Darius would be tormented by other villagers, thinking he never should have been born. One older girl, however, a hunter with burning red braided hair, provided comfort and care to the young boy, pledging she'll always protect him from anything or anyone. On a fateful night, soldiers broke into his family house to excise the Crest from their village, slaying Darius's father and mother. It was then that the girl of crimson hair leapt in front of the axe meant for Darius's head. In a sudden burst of light and the searing heat of the Crest, they were all gone. All except him. Charlene was gone, all because of Darius. 13 years pass. Even in his young adulthood, Darius has achieved renown as one of the 4 great swordsmen of Salta, hiding his crest in shame while brandishing the blade against the Morians that killed his family. There he stands, under the base of the Grand Bilyana tree, ready to burn it to the ground, to bury the curse it brings upon this land, and his guilt under blankets of ash. But above him hangs a large spherical fruit, shimmering in the light, reflecting a strange projection of yellow trees, rippling water, and Darius felt the crest burn as he saw her vibrant red hair, illuminated by sunbeams streaming through the trees. Evergrace is Fromsoftware's second PlayStation 2 game released on April 27th of 2000, nearly missing the window of being a launch title in Japan by almost 2 months, but fitting comfortably before the North American or European launch of the system, making it Schrodinger's launch title depending on who you ask. Before we get started, it's important to note that much of the starting story prologue is not actually conveyed to the player clearly, due to either intentional obfuscation or poor translation. In fact, the backstory of these characters is barely touched upon to begin with, left for the player to intuit, while many details about what's going on or important context surrounding Darius or Charlene are not even in the game. Some story is left intentionally vague for the player to figure out. Regarding external characters and lore, that works out perfectly fine, even making the mystery of the plot more intriguing. But for our 2 main characters, we really don't know anything about them, and as the plot unfolds, lacking the complete backstory leads to a less emotionally satisfying conclusion overall. Due to the nature of this video, you're not going to be able to understand how Evergrace presents itself without blindly playing the game firsthand. The foundation of a great story exists, it's just hardly touched or built upon during the regular game. But it is there. The writers established so much that the players were unable to see, so when the game was converted into a novel shortly after its release, the story came together properly. Many loose threads were connected, and many characters got proper backstory or plot significance that allows them to feel real. But again, this is not information present within the game. It is canon, however, so for this video I'm going to mix important information from the novel that the regular game is lacking and present a complete version of Evergrace's story. Darius awakes upon Saramad Hill, where he meets a golden butterfly, much to his great confusion.
Outside? Outside of what?
Whether you choose to start Charlene or Darius's campaign, the player is blessed with Age Tech's strongest voice acting.
Huh? I can't remember. What?
Please, wait here a second.
Perfectly setting the tone for the scuffed journey ahead. Some of these lines are good at least, especially in Darius's journey with his massive sass.
I know, it's magical. Right out of a fairy tale. It'll make me 100 times stronger.
And characters that are oddly comedic, be it the random guy backing off a cliff in fear of Darius's crest. I mean, that's totally Darius's fault. This is obviously a joke, but it also showcases how Darius has been treated by practically everyone his whole life besides Charlene, and possibly his fellow swordsman of Solta. It's a good bit with an actual underlying significance. Nobody trusts Darius because of the mark on his hand, and anything they end up doing to themselves is blamed on the crest. There's also the old man Darius meets, that's supposedly the old king of Rubain according to the novel.
Go away. You bother me.
We've seemed to interrupt the Kingsfield 4 narrator, with his deeply serious voice and straight delivery making his lines unintentionally hilarious.
That's not funny.
Evergrace simultaneously has better and worse voice acting than Eternal Ring. Where that game was overall okay, Evergrace has the height of good performances and the pit of hilariously scuffed deliveries.
Sienna! I'm so glad to see you. You're Sienna, right?
Chrysalis is the golden butterfly that finds Darius flattened on the cliffs of Saramad Hill, who acts as a recurring guide for Darius, pointing him in the direction of Rubain Castle and telling him to take down the demon, while also tutoring him about Palmyra armaments. Palmyra is a phrase you'll be hearing in Evergrace a lot. It's used to describe the weapons themselves by Chrysalis, as they're made/infused by Palmyra. It's the crystal currency dropped from monsters. There's Palmyra actions that are special moves. Sometimes it's even used as a term for equipment durability itself. Sure, durability is a highly prevalent mechanic throughout Evergrace, as almost every piece of equipment will degrade over time if equipped, regardless of being actively used. Swords do not decay through basic attacks, boots don't get worn down via walking. No, simply the passage of time is enough for these enchanted arms to degrade. The wind of Rubain is apparently as strong as a river gnawing away at rock, but my sword is eroding away at the sheer inconvenience of being held. Because of this system, you'll end up doing a lot of routine maintenance on your gear, which only costs money and a little bit of time. There's no repair all option, and each class of equipment requires you to go to a different stall in the shop for maximum time consumption. At least durability doesn't steadily lower your gear's stats like it does in Shadow Tower, but unlike Shadow Tower, this mechanic is not very engaging to interact with. In that game, durability was a finite resource, where you'd have to sacrifice your own health, another, more precious resource, in order to restore your gear to full power. Often, juggling several weapons was necessary in order to get through areas, and other equipment only degraded with active use, so those could be conserved effectively. Repair shops were spread thin and required intelligent weapon management or lengthy backtracking that could result in even more health or durability use. So atrophy was this constant looming threat throughout the whole game that complemented the already oppressive gameplay of Shadow Tower. In Evergrace, however, it's a mere annoyance that doesn't push the player into using different sets of equipment. Areas are rather small and always house a save crystal that teleports directly to the shop. Equipment degradation is never a building threat because the player can constantly upkeep their gear, and most weapons degrade very slowly on their own without directly using Palmyra actions. No area, not even the excessively long bonus dungeon, is long enough for most average weapons to break. Some armor is, but those quickly become annoying to upkeep, and there are decent boots and headgear that won't degrade over time to circumvent that. Really good gear degrades too fast and is only really feasible to equip during boss fights, unless you enjoy frequent trips to the shop to painstakingly repair each piece of equipment. Repairing gear is rather inexpensive, so it's not taxing on player resources through the constant upkeep. I can only see this mechanic driving the player to change up their gear if they were doing a specific run where they couldn't repair or use the shop. It's not great when a piece of armor degrading too quickly makes me straight up not want to use it at all, because repairing constantly is too inconvenient. This whole system system is not challenging, doesn't really force the player to work around it, and only serves to make the player visit the shop more often. It's not even a money sink or huge resource tax. Personally, I feel it would have been better if equipment only degraded on active use. I think I'd be more incentivized to use the frail armor that could break in a few hits when it doesn't break over the course of me running through an empty area. As it stands in game, it doesn't add much depth to gear choice or combat, beyond disincentivizing the player from spamming special moves that are not even the best regular combat option anyways. Combat in Evergrace is rather simple. You have the standard attack button, sprinting, and Palmyra actions that all consume stamina. Damage is determined largely from the stats of an individual weapon rather than the level of Darius or Charlene themselves. In fact, there is no leveling system in Evergrace at all, besides fruit items that increase your stat points in strength, endurance, intelligence, resistance, and luck. This makes progression solely tied to gear acquisition and upgrading, with the incentive to kill enemies being for their money to enhance equipment over any form of XP. There is no dodging, so gameplay is as straightforward as walking around the enemy and swiping at them. However, the PlayStation 2 has pressure-sensitive buttons that not many games made use of. Not Fromsoftware though. They'll refuse to adapt the right analog stick for 5 years, but immediately hop on button sensitivity to determine your attack strength. The intensity of your press has a wide range of power, from very light to 100% of your stamina. The higher percentage usage obviously increases the power of your strike, but also the likelihood of staggering your opponent. It's beneficial to use low power, as your stamina will recharge faster and allow you to attack immediately after. But it's also viable to use your entire stamina bar, as it'll almost guarantee a stagger on your enemy. You can also adjust the sensitivity, allowing for easier 100% strikes without crushing your poor PlayStation 2 controller's square button. The whole system ties in really well with how the lower Darius or Charlene's health is, the lower their max stamina gauge becomes. You would think that this lowers the peak damage of weapons, but no, it only impacts how fast it takes for stamina to recharge to full. This makes it so you can play risky at low health, hit hard at 100%, while still benefiting from incredibly fast stamina recharge, and effectively be able to attack right away as if it were a low-powered strike. It's a pretty accurate conversion of Kingsfield combat into a 3D action game, with the added bonus of lower health equals faster stamina regen, making the system really engaging for how simple it is, and requiring far less wait time than in the Kingsfield series. There's no penalty when depleting exactly full stamina, which makes this method viable, but continuing to consume stamina beyond 100% through sprinting will incur a recharge delay like in Kingsfield. This is what makes Palmyra actions somewhat inconvenient to use, as they always consume all of your character's stamina with the added recharge delay, preventing any quick follow-up attacks with not much power increase to compensate. Some Palmyra actions allow Darius or Charlene to chain attacks together and perform a finisher, which is quite good DPS compared to regular attacks, but certain enemies can block mid-combo and it completely wastes your stamina and durability. The blocking system is very annoying, mostly because the rules the enemies benefit from don't apply to your character as well. Enemies can begin blocking practically the exact frame your attack lands, take no damage, and stagger you in turn. It feels like the enemies are reading your inputs with how quickly they snap from attacking to blocking. It just feels cheap how easily and frequently they can negate all damage. The block Palmyra action on the player's end, however, is absolutely atrocious, with a second-long windup that leaves you vulnerable to damage while constantly degrading your weapon for however long it's active. I ended up not using this at all as it wasn't worth the resources, in both the full stamina depletion and durability of my weapon. If this had simply been a normal action functioning similar to the enemy's block, but less overpowered obviously, it would have been a welcome addition to combat. However, your only other means of avoiding damage are walking or running around the enemy, which is only so effective, and not quite as fun as perfectly timing a block. With basic combat out of the way, the attention is back on Darius as he makes it through Ceramod Hill into the underground caverns, teaching the rest of the mechanics persisting throughout Evergrace. There are trapped chests, an environmental obstacle in the form of an ice wall that can be broken with an opposing elemental attack, in this instance the Fire Raid Palmyra action from an armor piece, establishing the norm that most puzzles throughout this game are solved through bashing them with the right stick. And finally, the simple process of visiting the shop for importance equipment, as many weapons and armor can only be bought or dropped by one specific enemy type. Stock in the shop also changes per area, and most backtracking isn't allowed, meaning you might miss out on some special gear if not checking the shop frequently or buying whatever's listed when given the chance. It's an odd choice to lock certain random pieces of equipment to different regions, but not something that obstructs the player's progress besides 100%ing the item list. Crucial weapons, especially for the start of the run, will for the most part persist throughout all of the shops, and the player will have access to at least one of each elemental attack for puzzles if they look hard enough through their equipment list. The shop is also home to a turnip goblin who eats mushrooms for discounts, rates your fashion, and listens to Kota Hoshino's finest work. Oddly, in the Japanese version, the shop has these large rocks intersecting with the walls that are removed in the US version, possibly because they obstruct the camera, but I quite like the atmosphere these rocks give to the room. It feels too empty in the US version, like there's a lot of unused space in the back of the shop that only houses the warp crystal. The rocks cause the camera to move around far more in the shop, giving it a more dynamic feel over the static and empty room in the Western version. The Evergrace soundtrack is perhaps one of the most vibrant and bizarre scores of a FromSoft game. I'll let many tracks speak for themselves in the background and go more in depth on Kota Hoshino's philosophy behind the music in due time, but for now, we're 15 minutes deep into Evergrace and barely any Evergracing has happened. Darius gets hit by clearly telegraphed floor spears after dodging the random slow arrows that suddenly appeared from the barren cave walls. Unlike the environmental puzzles, traps like these are rather rare and out of place compared to everything else. Maybe they were a relic of early development that got phased out, or perhaps the floor spears are there to telegraph to the player to not continue in that direction, where they would inadvertently drop into a boss arena. Said boss is pretty easy. The golem is another mechanism to teach the player, in swapping their weapon to a better damage type to exploit enemy weaknesses. Since this big guy is clearly made of stone or metal, blunt force is likely the best route to take. If the player continues slashing at the boss with the starting sword, they'll find themselves a needlessly lengthy but not difficult battle. As common throughout Evergrace, engaging with its mechanics is more a matter of avoiding inconvenience, as hitting the same guy 50 times is more boring than challenging. But in this category, it does considerably shift the difficulty, particularly with late game enemies that are actually threatening. Still, if you have one weapon that deals stupid amounts of slash, blunt, or pierce, it'll be capable of killing most foes. This mechanic is mostly important for bosses, and elemental affinities as well. What the player wants to avoid above all else is more inconvenience, such as healing a fire enemy for the same amount of damage they'd normally deal if attacking with a fire weapon. Sometimes this is easy to track in the case of spiders clearly made of magma, but every enemy has an affinity and it's not always clear. The same goes for weapons with just a little bit of fire, ice, wind, or lightning. It'll still heal the enemy all the same. Damage is not split between elemental/physical. It's one or the other without a clear distinction, creating a slight mix-up for the player to work around, forcing them to actually change their equipment, albeit just their weapon, far more than the durability system does. The golem drops the guard boots, which establish the other half of Evergrace puzzles. The equipment you wear actually matters, activating a doorway or unlocking an item with the right clothing equipped, and figuring that out contextually is pretty satisfying. For now, it's just the guard lift that requires guard boots equipped to be operated, but in a few future spots, entire sets or mixed-matched outfits have to be worn to progress, which makes a very interesting and unexpected use out of regular mundane player equipment. This is further expanded upon in Castle Rubain, where alternate paths through the dungeon can be accessed through intelligent equipment usage. You can crush the pillars blocking some corridors, or make use use of the rare float Palmyra action on Dragalos legs to circumvent the poison pools on the other half of the castle to get to the same place. It's a fun, open-ended system that allows the player to discover new uses for their equipment and approach roadblocks in multiple ways. You can also just tank the damage from the poison pool. It's much better than requiring the player to need one particular item in order to proceed. Instead, Evergrace respects the intelligence of its audience by allowing them to tackle an open-ended problem. This is one of the more unique things Evergrace does above other Fromsoftware games at this time, as Kingsfield and Echo Knight are almost solely focused on puzzle solving through one specific key item or action that only has its sole use in that scenario. There are a few exceptions, like the harp in Kingsfield 1 allowing the player to grab extra treasure, but for the most part those games feel like a grab X to proceed through Y sort of adventure. There's nothing wrong with that. I like the system, even. It suits the exploration-heavy gameplay of Kingsfield that would require the player to intricately explore each map and thus find important key items in order to progress. But it's very refreshing to see this new style of puzzle solving after so many iterations of the X and Y system before this point. At the top of the castle is a chain requiring Darius to have a piece of royal equipment on in order to be broken, and beyond that is a scorpion plant centipede demon. In the novel, this is supposed to be Princess Lusumer of the Rubane dynasty, who was left behind in the chaos of an invasion by strange demons resulting from Morpheus's experiments. Morpheus is another character lightly touched upon by now. He was the main scientist backed by Rubane, but their partnership grew sour over time as Morpheus's work became increasingly depraved, kidnapping villagers from the outskirts of the kingdom to practice inhumane experiments for questionable ends. It seems after Lusumer was locked in the castle alone without any guards, she was experimented upon herself by the mad scientist. The novelization also includes Prince Orladin in this section of the story, as he ventures with Darius throughout the castle to save Lusumer, who is torn between the mind of her monstrous form and her old self, and ends up being left behind by the group yet again, wailing in agony, fear, and despair. Obviously, the game is much different, as no character journeys with our protagonists, and most of this surrounding backstory isn't written in the game. But it's clear through her dialogue that Lusumer is lost and afraid on the inside, seemingly not in control of her actions. She wildly thrashes about and begs for help. I suppose killing her is a mercy. Immediately following that boss fight is another boss fight that is definitely more of a challenge with his multiple projectile attacks and somewhat difficult to dodge lightning strike. Darius walks in on a child who then transforms into a demon, but this demon is not the demon we've been told about in dialogue, just a strange, powerful kid. The castle begins to inexplicably fall apart, and Darius gets jump scared by a mysterious woman, guiding him to an excessively long elevator that brings him deep underground.
I wanted to help him, the boy who gazed sadly at his own hands. So I...
Charlene wakes up in an unknown land, the royal commons of Rubane. She was rescued by the same woman Darius just met in his story, Sienna. The first word Charlene properly speaks is Darius, as if that were the last person she saw or was thinking about.
Darius?
If you thought Darius's voice acting was bad, well, oh boy, it's professional compared to Charlene's. She's very dopey and detached sounding, like she doesn't know where she is or who she's speaking to. It sort of adds to the idea of her being very confused and out of her element, as she did just wake up in a mysterious new land after an indeterminate amount of time. A place, mind you, is so old that she considers it to be a fairy tale. Charlene's vacant communication skills are not so easy to dismiss in-universe, however. This is likely a consequence of rushed voice recording or poor direction, not exactly the fault of the actor. Many early FromSoft games suffer from similar scuffed English voice acting. Evergrace is just outstandingly funny about it.
I think I have a better shot at it than you. You look bad.
As she pokes her head out of the shack, we get our first glimpse at Morpheus right before he blows the fuck out of the place with no hesitation. The mysterious floating child appears again, who Sienna refers to as Trandon. They all teleport away, leaving Charlene behind, but not before Sienna mentions the curse of the Crest she has, triggering Charlene's memories of how Darius had been mistreated and motivating her to save Sienna. Since you can start Evergrace as either character, Charlene has a similarly simple introduction that establishes the fundamental mechanics of puzzle solving through a statue that only moves with no weapon equipped, and basic combat, but with the twist of a completely unique weapon type to Charlene. There are only 2 bows in Evergrace, but they add an entirely new defensive angle to combat. Distance doesn't really play into Darius's combat style, as his only range attack option is through the rigid and taxing Palmyra actions that on their own don't deal great damage for how slow and short-ranged they are. Charlene, on the other hand, has the opportunity to avoid most damage by running backwards and shooting the enemy from afar, with the trade-off of its wind-up making close-quarter combat more difficult. It's a fun weapon type that fits Charlene's character, as she's supposed to be a hunter after all. It also helps to differentiate the playstyle of both characters. The player has the opportunity to switch from one when combat gets too samey or grating into a different style that can add variety to the simple gameplay. The slight variations in how each character controls helps make both storylines feel unique rather than just playing more Evergrace. Charlene feels slightly faster in movement and combat, which is very refreshing after dealing with the lumbering Darius who gets all of his strikes blocked. The Royal Commons connects straight to a familiar sight, Saramad Hill, but in a different state than when Darius shows up. Here, Charlene meets the same old man who mentions that Rubain is sealed from the outside, so it should have been impossible for Charlene, a girl from Solta, to get in, an important story detail to keep in mind. As I briefly mentioned, you can start Evergrace as either character, and beyond that you can switch between both Darius and Charlene's story at any time through the save crystals. Personally, I like to play through one completely before the other, but the only requirement is that both storylines be completed for the ending chapter to unlock. For this review, I'm switching between the two in segments, obviously, but they aren't quite in chronological order since Charlene visits Saramad Hill before Darius shows up, as the pillar that blocks Darius's path ends up falling when Charlene leaves the area. Charlene gets teleported to Morpheus's human research lab, filled with unassuming floor traps, advanced teleporters, hentacles, and no real actual humans. Besides Prince Orladin, who lies injured in a corner chamber. Unlike in the novel, Orladin doesn't play a major role in the story, and only serves to deliver some information or key items to the player while dying, instead of traveling with Darius. Most areas in Evergrace are short and sweet, relatively easy to progress through and hit the next story beat. For Charlene though, this human research dungeon takes up about half of her playthrough. Even after encountering the off-putting Morpheus directly, who begins hysterically laughing about the Crest and a cycle, there are still 2 more levels to go through. Each level is different enough. Floor 1 below is entirely centered around an environmental puzzle requiring the player to use the opposite attribute for the 4 elements in each corner of the map. I'm speeding through these segments, so it's not accurate to how they feel in-game. These levels are quite large and require a lot of running back and forth, nearly an hour of moving around the same area that has been glossed over. Coupled with the same background music and environmental design, it makes this section of the game feel much longer and out of place from the rather rapid pace of progression of the rest of the game. This isn't a bad dungeon by any means, and Charlene is blessed by a long spear with practically no wind-up to attack, which steamrolls most enemies, taking out the tedium of combat that would pad the area even further. It just feels like Charlene is in this lab for exceedingly long, especially for an early game dungeon. It makes her story progression feel slower, and by the time you finish the area, you're already halfway through. When Charlene warps past floor 1, she meets Medina, Morpheus' granddaughter. Both in-game and the novelization, Medina isn't very relevant to the main story. She's a sickly girl that's only able to survive because of Morpheus' advancements, so she's effectively trapped in these facilities as a bystander to his atrocities. Medina doesn't support her grandfather and helps Charlene teleport to the next area in her storyline. In the novel, Medina helps Darius instead, after he's injured in an intense battle. In both instances, she departs from the story as quickly as she entered. Finally, Charlene is free from the oh god damn it, there's a third level, but at least the environment drastically changes at this point, making the area feel much more unique. The large spinning platforms give you a nice break from slowly running through lengthy corridors, and instead make you slowly wait for the platforms to revolve. At least the underground layer is a change of pace and has two noteworthy encounters, one being a statue that requires the player to color each piece of their armor blue in order to activate. Coloring armor was initially an unnoteworthy mechanic that allowed the player to finely tune their fashion, as different armor and weapons reflect on Darius and Charlene's actual appearance. At first I thought this was just a weird gimmick, but utilizing this niche feature to progress is pretty interesting and unexpected. It somewhat mirrors the depth in the game's environmental puzzle solving in the sense that you can use any piece of equipment for the solution, but being able to color any armored piece makes the process rather simple, as instead of finding the one set of blue armor throughout all the equipment you've acquired or purchased, you don't even have to put in that much effort, being able to color any random assortment of armor. Secondly is a unique enemy in this area being Mimic Tier Charlene that copies your current equipment, but is made laughably easy via the spear. Overall, the underground portion of the research facility isn't too lengthy or tedious, unlike the underground shrine that Darius has been running around in for a solid hour, rotating one mirror at a time to open a single door, then running all the way back to repeat that process 7 times. What awaited Darius at the end of that long elevator is possibly the largest example of padding throughout all of Evergrace. The player's movement speed is rather slow, even when running, so when placed in a vast underground maze that requires you to run back and forth from opposing ends, I'm sure you can see where this is going. There's not even that much to this area, just hit 3 different elemental totems to unlock 3 mirrors, then rotate the front 2 panels to unlock the various colored doors throughout the labyrinth. The major problem is that you can only have 1 door open at a time. You can't just have 2 adjacent colored doors open simultaneously. No. You have to run to the mirrors, find the door and open up the chest, run back to the mirrors, tread forward at moderate pace through the same hallway you were just in, all to open another chest 5 feet away from where you started. Oh, and if you unlock all the mirrors at once before trying to rotate the combination of 2, congratulations, you've locked yourself out of getting the Omega Squeaky Toy Hammer that becomes one of the best weapons in the game. You need at least the royal boots from 1 door in this area, and to unlock a different gate to ascend out of the cave. Through that process, you'll be running around the entire dungeon at least 3 times, given you know where everything is. However, expect to spend much longer looping through this place several times if you want to get everything. Maybe you'll even fall off a cliff and lose progress because the designers decided to add a bottomless pit surrounding almost the entire dungeon. Fuck you. It may sound like I hate Evergrace whenever I complain about it so aggressively, but this is all to illustrate how it actually feels to play the game. You can have wonderful moments in puzzle solving and pleasant exploration, then be abruptly smacked by a brick wall of tedium, leading to a very bipolar experience. It's not like these moments of difficulty have no place, as a frictionless journey holds no meaning, but they end up dragging down the pacing of the story when lasting longer than most other areas. Weird choices like the instant death pits surrounding the entire area also adds a layer of spite to what would otherwise be acceptable, albeit boring loops through the same map. Here in the underground maze is not so bad, as getting knocked off is pretty uncommon, but this makes a certain optional endgame dungeon egregious to play through, which we'll get to later. Like, okay, Evergrace, you ate all my food. You didn't have to spit in my mouth afterwards, too. That's my best way of describing how the drawn out or unnecessarily punishing aspects of Evergrace feel, not necessarily applying to just this area. I like the concept of the rotating mirror puzzle, but it overstays its welcome, much like how I enjoy most parts of Evergrace initially, before it forcefully opens my mouth again. At least Darius is in the Royal Commons now. That's some nice refreshing air and relaxing backtracking after being stuck in that labyrinth for over an hour. I haven't spoken much about the presentation of Evergrace, so now that we're revisiting a few of the most beautiful areas in the game, it's a good time for that. Practically every magazine article for this game I found mentions the fact that Evergrace started development as a PlayStation 1 title, but eventually shifted onto the PlayStation 2 due to hardware limitations, particularly with presenting characters and their clothing effectively. According to the Evergrace OST liner notes, development was cut about 50% through and had to be reworked from the ground up on the PlayStation 2. However, the music was already complete, meaning there are iterations of these tracks never officially released, songs that were cut from Shadow Tower. The story was also likely planned out at this point, given how deep it is in comparison to other FromSoft games of this time. Even with the novelization having more time to flesh out lore and characters, the foundation for everything still underlies Evergrace itself, and that's not something that could have been done quickly or made up afterwards. What's really strange to me though, given the graphical engine was reworked, is the flickering brought on from bad deinterlacing that I've only ever gotten out of a PS1 before this. Even with this average cheap component to HDMI adapter that I've played every other PlayStation 2 game on before, I've never witnessed this kind of issue on the console. Furthermore, an OSSC I bought specifically to try and alleviate this issue doesn't affect anything. I could potentially try other advanced hardware, but regardless, Evergrace is outputting its graphics in a weird, archaic way that I haven't encountered from any other PS2 game. Hell, Eternal Ring doesn't have this and was released even earlier, but that game was never said to have a PS1 beta phase. I'm sure not everybody has this issue with the game, and it doesn't ruin the visuals as it's mostly present during cutscenes when things on screen are standing still. It's just an oddity that I can't quite understand. I'm led to believe that this jittering is a remnant all the way from PS1 Evergrace's development that somehow carried over through the complete visual overhaul. So if your eyes hate watching these cutscenes and all the flickering, I'm sorry. I even bought new hardware to try and fix it. Evergrace is just weird like that. Despite supposedly being recreated, the character models have a very blocky PlayStation 1.5 feel to them. Not as detailed as they could be given the hardware, but still beyond PS1 capabilities. Although this could be because of how early into the life of the PlayStation 2 Evergrace was developed under. Many late-stage PS2 games are beautiful works of art beyond anything released near launch, as developers and artists understood the hardware better over time. Conversely, early PS2 games usually had some facet of visual jank resulting from the new technology. The glossy look of Ridge Racer 5's 3D models betrayed its launch title status. Kessin, on the other hand, has more natural-looking characters and cleaner FMVs, but the regular gameplay is rather Drakenguardian, a large open map containing many small character models without much detail to compensate, until you zoom into a skirmish, of course. And while Kessin is a damn interesting and impressive game, my point overall is that these early titles usually had one really good visual angle, but could be lacking in other places. For Evergrace, its texture and model work may not be stunning, but the color direction is beautiful. I think most areas speak for themselves visually. This isn't the most interesting map design FromSoftware have created, but it's far from dull. Evergrace benefits from a wide and vibrant color palette that distinguishes most of its areas and enemies from each other. Where on the PlayStation for Kingsfield or Armored Core 1, the skyboxes were usually the most visually distinct or colorful aspect of an area, in Evergrace the environments greatly outshine the sky above. Particularly, Ceramod Hill makes good use of yellow, with its beautiful trees where the sunbeams shine through. Definitely one of the prettiest areas, and a great opener to the eccentric Evergrace. Additionally, the character design of Darius and Charlene are some of the best FromSoft have created so far. Of course, Armored Core had exceptional mech designs, due largely in part by Shoji Kawamori creating the concept art for the ACs. Before the PS2, characters in Kingsfield or Echo Knight were pretty basic, with the few outliers of Ariel from Shadow Tower or some other enemies from that game. Of course, the hardware of the PS1 limited the quality of these models in-game, but the artistry behind behind the characters themselves was not very strong, more so function over form. Simple models that did the job but didn't stand out much. That effort would go more into creating the vast amounts of enemy models in Kingsfield or Shadow Tower. It seems in the next generation that Fromsoftware allocated more resources towards the art department, or at least were hiring new designers in this era. Ken Sugawara is a new name to Fromsoftware, who was the character designer for Evergrace and its sequel, joining the company in 1999 for Spriggan Lunarverse and Framegride, but not sticking around for very long. Junichiro Ishino, the main graphic designer, was similarly onboarded in 1999 with Armored Core Master of Arena, and seemed to be with the company until around 2010. Yuzo Kojima, chief 3D modeling designer and director of Evergrace, began with Shadow Tower in 1998, and is still working with Fromsoftware to this day, with producer credits in Elden Ring. The credits for these games is starting to expand. New projects are getting more of a proper budget, and Fromsoftware is gaining talent in every aspect of its development team, not just the composers I tend to focus on. This coincides with the launch of the PlayStation 2 that allows for the greater effort put into character designs to shine through. The average character looks more stylized and detailed as time goes on, with these artists improving their craft alongside the evolving hardware. The consistency of red and orange in the palette of most main characters really complements the heavy use of yellow in the environments. Darius is one of the coolest Fromsoftware characters so far, his white hair making him stand out from everybody else, as if he doesn't really belong with how much the bright white clashes against the homogeneous color scheme of the world he lives in. Much like how everybody treats him like an oddity or curse because of the crest, Darius doesn't fit in with nature or people. Darius's shawl also stands him apart from the rest of the cast, as it gives him the illusion of a much bulkier and imposing build, fitting for a skilled and fearsome warrior. Charlene, on the other hand, is designed to be very welcoming. Her red hair blends seamlessly with the surrounding nature and clothing of her people. She wears humble sultan attire, giving a friendly and unassuming appearance. It's no doubt the people love Charlene, as she is as kind and caring as her appearance would suggest, an inverse reflection of Darius. At the end of the Royal Commons, Darius finds himself at the same statue that teleported Charlene into the human research lab. Instead, this time, after equipping the full royal armor set, the thing comes alive and starts beating him into a pulp. This is the first incline of difficulty in Darius's route, which itself is far tougher than Charlene's storyline that's generally devoid of bosses or difficulty due to her ranged weapons and swift spear. Darius, however, gets the short end of the sword and has to contend with large, tanky beasts that deal excessive damage faster than the player can keep up with. While this statue boss isn't impossibly difficult, it's easy to get trapped in a loop of getting launched away by his combo, needing to heal, and then getting caught again on the run back. The royal statue has very little windup, so standing in front is a death sentence, and due to his knockback and staggering, it's more difficult to strafe around him and avoid damage completely. Since Evergrace has been generally easy up until this point, you may not have upgraded any weapons. It hasn't been a very necessary mechanic to engage with, as the enemy weakness system is more suited for switching equipment to the right damage type instead of maxing out raw numbers. However, this is the first mandatory fight that's a proper health wall, and let's just say if you only upgrade one specific weapon because it deals the most damage, you're pretty screwed when any boss past this point is resistant to it. I only upgraded the Tear Blade at this point of the playthrough, since every other weapon I had was worse or unappealing. This is the Evergrace folly. I had sunk nearly 10,000 Palmyra pieces into this weapon that could have instead been spread out more evenly across my arsenal and made these late game fights easier. This boss is just a warning to the player to upgrade more weapons and diversify, as later bosses have greater resistances and seem to be able to heal from multiple element types. At this point, it's not a major issue, but I think it becomes a problem in the end game where the player is trapped right before a boss, with few means to obtain Palmyra to upgrade their weapons. Not only that, but if playing blindly, you have no idea what future bosses will be resistant to, so you could still end up enhancing the wrong weapons if they happen to be an affinity that heals the boss. While this could be a rare scenario that only I was unlucky enough to experience, it was very easy to almost completely ignore the upgrade system or get by with just one main weapon throughout the regular game. While that was a simple trap to fall into, the enemy weakness system still does a good job at subtly influencing the player into trying out the wide variety of weapons in Evergrace. At least during Darius's run, where not one weapon far outclasses all the others. I ended up using most of the new equipment I picked up throughout the game, but never realized their full potential, and eventually reverted back to the few upgraded gear I had. Still, this is far better for experimentation than Charlene's route, where the bow and early spear are by far the best combat options. The spear with such a small windup that no matter how little damage it might do, it still immediately strikes and staggers most enemies, granting it way more utility than most of Charlene's arsenal. Sure, you could just not use it, but players are more likely to optimize their gameplay as much as possible. I, for one, was glad to have a quick attack option after playing as Darius for 6 hours, who was never consistently faster than his enemies. It just came with a drawback of me experimenting far less with the equipment in Charlene's run, but at least most of the weapons available overlap across both characters. There's ample variety in gear choice, not just among weapons, but due to Evergrace being a rather simple game, there's not much of a need to switch up your equipment besides during the sparse boss fights. Outside of that, the player would need to spend time grinding Palmyra to upgrade whatever they want to consistently use. Combined with the inconsistent durability mechanic that degrades certain gear faster than others, turns experimenting into a greater effort than it really should be for a rather unnotable power difference. The player could use their new 60 durability club, but already own a 100 durability sword, or perhaps want to equip a silly bird nest on their head until it degrades 4 points per tick. There's not enough of an incentive for the player to use all their new equipment, given the apathy threshold of constantly repairing equipment or having to grind to maximize potential. It's a shame because there does seem to be a lot of unique and flashy Palmyra actions tied to upgraded gear, maybe even powerful enough for them to be useful, but those are locked behind spending extra time with the least engaging aspect of Evergrace. Killing the same dozen enemies in the same room repeatedly is not very interesting, and only for the potential of a good ability or marginally better weapon that is ultimately not necessary to beat the game. As a result, I didn't engage with Palmyra actions very much after the initial set of underwhelming abilities. I don't think it's fair to say these special moves are strictly bad, but they are generally more trouble than they're worth. I think the system has potential though, and I hope with Evergrace 2, more abilities are offered to the player without money farming, instead possibly linked to gear combinations where 2 Ice Palmyra moves fuse together into a stronger variant, which should grant more of an incentive for the player to switch up their gear and not just their main weapon, giving synergy to the whole equipment system beyond just stats increasing. Another prevalent element of Evergrace's marketing revolved around the fashion system, or mixed matching of equipment, so it was clearly a main focus of the game. Hell, even Darius switches to the royal equipment set in the novel. While I think the variety is there, the implementation leaves much to be desired with not much mechanical benefit in the system. The bones are there for a good gameplay feature though, and Fromsoftware don't typically throw out mechanics completely, so I'm excited to see if this gets built upon in the direct prequel. Defeating the statue takes Darius to an ice cavern with complementary sliding physics, but not as an annoying gimmick, just simply to fit the environment and add a cool, isolated feature to this area. Perhaps the developers were testing out mechanics or never ended up implementing sliding anywhere else in the game, but it's fun to mess around in, especially with thrusting weapons that can shoot Darius forward. It is kind of odd and unnecessary, especially doubling with the unique floating ice platforms near the end of the area that serve no purpose mechanically. It's like the developers were showing off their work or testing the limits of the PS2. At least these two details make the area far more memorable than it would be otherwise. These caves mostly serve to bridge the gap between zones. If you've never played Evergrace before, chances are you may have seen some of the beautiful promotional art, maybe even snippets of gameplay. In all likelihood though, your introduction to Evergrace in the modern day has been this song. a hyper, nonsensical track emblematic of Evergrace, its most polarizing piece for listeners to sink into madness over its incongruity or praise the song for its uniqueness and creativity. Most of Evergrace's soundtrack is cut from the same cloth, composed of bizarre samples and constructed to walk the thin line between traditional and full-on experimental music, being an absurd blend of instrumentation and voices that somehow resolve into a satisfying melody until devolving into a wall of noise. This is the work of Kota Hoshino that fully brings together the absurdist experience of Evergrace, music that represents the oddity of its plot and the circumstances Darius and Charlene find themselves in. Yuji Kanda, Keiichiro Sagawa, and Tsukasa Saito are all listed under sound credits as well for Evergrace, with Kota Hoshino being the lead composer. While these four usually work together on most Fromsoftware games, Hoshino is on record stating he wrote all of Evergrace's music, and is the only one fully credited on the soundtrack release, meaning Kanda, Sagawa, and Saito only contributed to sound design, and were likely focusing their composition efforts on the upcoming Eternal Ring or Armored Core 2. Kota Hoshino wanted to create a very personal soundtrack, something that represents his view on Evergrace and what he calls ethnic music, using the voice as an instrument in itself rather than as a lead, with many complementary strings and woodwinds to go alongside it. This culminates in a sound that mirrors the rustic aesthetic of character clothing and the underlying ancient civilization feeling of Evergrace's setting, where most people are living in tribes simply fighting for food and survival, as technological advancements seen in Rubain have been lost to time. The main instruments used were sourced by Hoshino himself. The shakuhachi and shamisen are two he mentions directly, giving the music a distinct Japanese feeling despite his intentions of an ethnic, non-Japanese sound. Overall, this fusion of cultural sounds gives Evergrace a very unique identity that matches its aesthetic of new and old civilization clashing together. Even compared to other Fromsoftware games, Evergrace's soundtrack is one of the most distinct among its contemporaries, and I've yet to listen to anything quite like it. The main battle themes are a violent mash of overlapping voices that channel the insanity and chaos of war. Evergrace's title theme is a track largely comprised of the voice as instrumentation, and properly establishes the tone for the rest of the game. The underground cavern music inversely utilizes almost no vocals, but is well structured and one of the groovier tracks. Rubain Castle is similarly lacking in vocals, this time completely devoid of them. Perhaps this is the representation of the cold, technological aspect of Evergrace's world, thus it's devoid of the human voice. That is, if you don't somehow glitch out the game, causing it to mix the sound samples of the shop and castle themes together, creating a cursed amalgamation of noise far more ominous than the original track. This happened during my Japanese playthrough, so perhaps it got patched out in later releases. The official Evergrace soundtrack CD also sounds much different than the in-game music, with added instruments and different mixing for most tracks that either make it sound blown out or quite tinny. Evergrace's music is quite limited though, and many tracks repeat throughout the playthrough, so these new mixes are quite welcome as a companion to the original game's soundtrack, but not viable as a full replacement. The soundtrack may be bizarre and unconventional, but I feel it's integral to the Evergrace experience. The game would not be nearly as charming without the experimental backing track to its clunky gameplay and outlandish story. After rotating for an eternity, Charlene is finally leaving the human research lab. However, she encounters Sienna slumped over a chair, while Morpheus above projects his voice at her. Somehow, Clearly something is amiss. Sienna seems vacant and unresponsive, almost like that child that's been hovering around Morpheus throughout the game. He casts some sort of spell at Charlene.
Hey, what's going on? I feel strange.
You're doing good, Charlene. Keep selling the scene. The audience is loving it. Sienna then limps out of the chair and flies around as if puppeted by Morpheus. She casts pretty powerful magic at Charlene, but is rather easy to strafe around. The regular bow makes quick work of her and can typically outrange Sienna's spells, making this a pretty easy fight if you've upgraded the bow.
What's going on? What did you do?
That's a wrap, boys. No second take necessary. Charlene is now inside the unassuming underground lava cavern that's directly adjacent to the ice caves. What the hell is this geography? No wonder Rubain got banished to the Shadow Realm. It must have experienced constant earthquakes from the climate war going on down here. She has to proceed past the ominous massive pool of lava in a tall circular chamber, but there's totally nothing to worry about here. I mean, why would this place be empty in the earlier timeline? Don't be so silly. Of course it's empty because right afterwards is a boss fight with Red Breeze, another incredibly well-designed character befitting the aesthetic of Evergrace, and one of the more intriguing cogs in the story. His fight is not too difficult with Charlene's quick spear circumventing most guard opportunities, and his movement isn't very quick or punishing either. Red Breeze shines in the novelization mostly, where he and Darius have an intense battle, resulting in Darius getting axed deep in the side, nearly dying, and descending in a ray of light to blast the hell out of Red Breeze with the Deus Ex Machina-ass power of the Crest. It's a gripping scene building on the capabilities of the Crest and why Darius has one. Red Breeze is an old Crest bearer of unknown origin, imprisoned by Morpheus as a research subject and thrown into the deepest pit of Rubain due to his immense strength. After Charlene talks to him and gives him peace in death, he teleports her to the place where she can
see all and know all.
This ends up being the one area she needs to go to save Sienna. When Charlene is gone, Red mentions a mother, the mother of all things, that the Morians of the modern day still worship alongside the great Biliana trees that sucked Darius into Rubain at the start of the game. There's clearly a connection between the Crest and the mother of all things that Red Breeze's abilities allude to, as no regular person can match Red Breeze in strength, or should be able to teleport someone at will, much like how Darius defies death and surges with power emanating from his crest in the novel. Even though Red Breeze states that crests don't have much power to begin with, they surely serve a purpose in linking a human to the mother of all things. We'll just have to wait and see what that purpose truly is as Evergrace proceeds. Meanwhile, Darius is fighting for his life in the center of a coliseum, manhandled by the toughest boss in the game, spreading him apart, and Charlene is there? This is the section of the game where the plot of Evergrace starts to pick up, and which the novel deviates most heavily from. In both scenarios, Darius climbs to the top of the coliseum and witnesses Morpheus, the flying child Trandon, and Charlene in the center.
Huh? Charlene? How could this be? No, this can't be. It's impossible. She died when I killed her.
Remember that Darius has felt guilt for 13 years over the assumption that he got Charlene killed. When Morian soldiers invaded his house, killed his family, and Charlene leapt in front of the chaos before they all disappeared. Darius didn't even know that Charlene was alive, and now he's stunned seeing her at the bottom of the Coliseum. In-game, Darius barrels through the doors yelling Charlene's name, who stands there silent and motionless. It's unclear if this is the real Charlene being affected by Morpheus' magic, as this could also be a clone of Charlene being developed. Through the mirror room that can copy Charlene, it's established that Morpheus has the capabilities of cloning someone, but it's still not obvious if this is the real Charlene or not. Regardless, they all teleport away before evil Red Cloud Strife busts in and breaks it down all over Darius' poor, supple body. In the novel, however, Charlene actually speaks and acts normally, although she doesn't recognize Darius, as the last time she saw him was when he was 7 years old. Charlene is trapped in some sort of magic field by Morpheus, but gets broken out by Darius and company, all while being blasted away by Trandon. Charlene desperately tries to snap the child out of Morpheus' control, but to no avail. Forced to flee, Darius, Charlene, and Aladdin escape the Colosseum, the reunion between the two happening far sooner than it does in-game, although they're still on awkward grounds until far later in the novel as well. Charlene is unsure if this Darius is the same Darius from her memory, as time seemingly hasn't passed for her or the other people stuck in past Rubain. Charlene hasn't aged and supposedly saw the 7-year-old Darius not too long ago. She's hesitant to accept this as the same person, making their ensuing interactions awkward. Darius is standoffish. He was so determined to rescue Charlene, but being faced by the girl he caused so much misfortune to, again, a new wave of anxiety and guilt washes over him. Charlene hasn't changed a bit in those 13 years, but Darius was a stranger to her. He's become more hostile and spiteful. Charlene might hate him for what he's become, so Darius doesn't try to convince her of anything, instead focusing on redeeming his mistakes. He hasn't saved her yet, and he could still cause her more pain. All because of that damn Crest. I much prefer the novel's depiction of events, as Charlene is actually present in the story and has agency, whereas in-game she acts like a plank of wood. Maybe whatever was planned for this scene was unfinished or scrapped, and that's why Charlene is there, but doesn't have any role to play. Regardless, Darius gets his ass whooped by this Fume Knight wannabe, with rapid sweeping attacks and follow-up projectiles for extra knockback-induced frustration. This is the first fight I actually died at on my first playthrough, but he's far from a pushover and still destroyed me on the second attempt. This is about the apex of natural difficulty in Evergrace, in the sense of it being derived solely from speed and damage over some obstructive gimmick to extend the fight that later bosses fall into. However, the skill ceiling for Evergrace is quite low, and the lack of opportunity for skill expression still makes this guy pretty frustrating, mostly because he's far faster than the player, and from his extra projectiles flying out of attacks that already had wide, hard-to-dodge hitboxes on their own. It's not strictly a bad fight, but since Darius is very limited on his abilities and movement, you end up engaging with most bosses in the same way: run around their backs and swing, repeat until dead. The difficulty could be far more enjoyable if the player had more combat options, even something as simple as a block or sideways roll for distance. So instead of failing to run away from a boss's attack in time over Darius's poor run speed, the player has a more active method of avoiding damage. And no, the block Palmyra is not good enough for this. Instead, the simplicity of combat makes this fight far more frustrating, even though it's a valid challenge. All you need to do is get better at the straightforward, same as ever combat, but that doesn't make it any fun. The developers were on a hot streak with this one, because after this incredibly speedy and aggravating boss, Darius gets sent to hell. Oh no. Not the lava caves again. Now, there's a big guy in the center of the suspicious lava pool that Darius, the man with no ranged weapon, has to somehow defeat. The shop sells a long spear right before this fight, but why bother when they program the guy to have enough room to back up and make it completely impossible to hit him with any melee attack? All you can do is spam Ice Raid while fuck-off fireballs launch from the sidelines to send Darius directly into the lava pool per their namesake. Back-to-back shots on Darius's poor twink physique by large red men. You'd wish he'd gone to hell for real. This is so much worse. No! This is the timeline where Darius would have fought Red Breeze in the novel, after which he's stuck half dead in the bleakest purgatory of all, the Shadow Tower. After the lava caves on both characters, they're sent to the Soaring Tower, which is the last dungeon in the game, and right away the player can attack the northwest pillar to spawn the rare Palmyra Bee enemy with a varied drop table, including the elusive Dark Totem piece. There were Palmyra Bees in Charlene's route back in the Human Research Lab 2F, but at such an early point they would be difficult to kill given their ability to constantly circle towards the back of your character, requiring an AoE Palmyra action to slay effectively. The only other means to obtain this item that I know of is during Darius's story, using a red mask to unlock a secret door in Castle Rubain, which itself was obtained through the ice crystal in the opening cave area. This seems to be the only unlock in Evergrace locked behind multiple separate puzzles, and awards the player with 2 whole Dark Totem pieces. Wow. However, both characters can venture into the Shadow Tower, which is necessary to obtain 100% items, as nearly half of the game's equipment is trapped within this optional dungeon. Quite unfortunately, as this is probably the worst thing I've ever had to do in a Fromsoftware game. Besides maybe bashing my head for 3 hours, mind-numbingly grinding in frame grind. But that was easy! However, in the Shadow Tower, you have to do that exact same thing for most individual enemies, in order to get one piece of equipment. Each weapon or armor piece within this dungeon is assigned to one enemy type and drops at random, usually around 20 to 30 kills, heavily weighted on luck. This becomes frustrating when enemies don't spawn if you stay in the same place for too long. They usually spawn in pairs with long intervals in between waves. Running back and forth through the same floor only helps so much when they don't consistently appear on a schedule. To top it all off, your progress in this dungeon is incredibly fragile. You may have noticed the layout of this Shadow Tower is far less exciting and varied, being a flat plane with the same looping square platforms, segmented by railless bridges over the eternal abyss. Enemies can still spawn on these bridges, and more often than not, they will, instead of the safe center of each platform. The only thing more consistent than your weapon degrading in Evergrace is every monster's ability to knock Darius or Charlene back with any attack possible, ending your run in an instant without much opportunity to avoid the hits, especially when large AoE moves can span the width of the entire bridge. You could be an hour deep into the Shadow Tower having meticulously killed hundreds of enemies just for a handful of items, and the next second your run is taken out back and shot because they decided to program a boss monster with wide-reaching poison spray to be able to spawn on a spiral staircase. Of course, the long-range weightless projectiles deal heavy knockback damage. Why wouldn't they? There is no saving allowed in the tower, and escaping too safe resets all of your progress in the dungeon itself, except for any items you've acquired. It doesn't mean much when some drops are at the very end of the gauntlet, thus each subsequent equipment piece will take longer and longer to get back to each time you reset. All this dungeon consists of is slowly running through uninspired floors with little to no variation in the environment and nothing interesting going on for an indeterminate amount of time before randomly getting launched off, forcing you to reset anyways and repeat the process all over again. Except it's not even as simple as that. You can't just run past all the monsters even after clearing a floor on a previous run. You have to kill a dozen or so of one particular enemy per level just for the privilege to form the end bridge and refight an old boss that can still knock you off the small platform anyways. Fuck you. Why not give the player a checkpoint after each floor? Why force them to start from the very beginning to replay the weakest dungeon design FromSoft have ever made for little reward? It's not strictly the enemies that kill you, it's the ever-present instant death cliffs that surround this entire area. The biggest challenge is merely continuing to play the game after unceremoniously losing all of your progress. Even with these setbacks and death removed, the entire gameplay of this tower dungeon is incredibly boring. When not having to entertain the developer's twisted sense of challenge, all you're doing is running through this bastardization of Shadow Tower's name, where the only opportunity for exploration lies in which fork in the Red Bridge Road to walk across until you eventually bumble your way into the next teleporter. It's not engaging, it's dragged out for way too long, and the looming threat of death is only terrifying in the sense that more of your precious transitory time on this earth has been consumed by this awful, uncaring megastructure.
それとここから絶対に出ちゃダメ。え？
You may have noticed that I've rarely touched upon the exploration aspect of Evergrace, far opposed to its mainstay as a prevalent topic during Kingsfield, Shadow Tower, the game, or Eternal Ring, even given that game's a rather simple area design. However, in retrospect, Eternal Ring's areas are more intricate than Evergrace's. At least they have branching paths, so I'd give Eternal Ring more credit in that regard, especially after experiencing this vapid Shadow Tower stage. Eternal Ring's extra optional dungeon dungeon had confusing maze floors and difficult combat encounters that made the area harsh and taxing, but fair even with the near one-shots for most enemies. At least every situation was recoverable even when unprepared. You had a chance to recover from near death instead of one slip-up sending you back to your last save point. Mind you, this dungeon was 5 long floors, also had no save points, and I didn't complain about it, because your survivability was solely linked to player skill. Evergrace is not much of an exploration game. It was clearly not a major focus during development, unlike how dungeon crawling is integral to the Kingsfield experience. Evergrace is mostly focused on the player solving puzzles in the environment with a very clear through line to progression, rather than obfuscating their objective through multiple pathways and slow burn key puzzles prevalent in the Field series. Areas are short and sweet with Evergrace, and the difficulty does not lie in figuring them out. The point of these maps is more to create a unique challenge through a specific environmental puzzle and quickly advance rather than throwing the player into a maze to steadily decipher. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just a far different design philosophy than most other FromSoft games up until this point. That's why I haven't really delved into most areas. There's not a whole lot of interesting things going on. The focus is more on the overarching journey of each character and their stories. Personally, I enjoy the challenge in exploring the intricate dungeons of Kingsfield and feel a rift in the gameplay that the simple combat on its own isn't able to fill. It's not a huge problem when the areas are short and the story consistently comes in to retain intrigue, but in any long stretches spent in one area, the lacking feeling of the gameplay becomes very apparent. Combat is not very engaging and neither is exploration, besides one-off environmental puzzle solving. Everything becomes dull and repetitive when no progression is being made. The Shadow Tower is a culmination of that feeling, stretched into an hour-long gauntlet that can reset at any moment, making your suffering theoretically infinite. In the novel, Darius is wandering through the tower after nearly dying to Red Breeze. His injuries made no difference to him. He was ultimately determined to save Charlene. He wanders past apparitions of his companions. Chrysalis vanishes after Darius laments about all the pain the Crest has caused him, and how he wants it all to disappear. He then relives his painful memories as a child while fighting the shades of Red Breeze and Lusumer.
He's the reason our crops are dying.
Stay away from him, son.
Is he really a god of death?
We can kill people if we use this charm.
Shut up! I never wanted the Crest to begin with!
Yeah, but is it really a death?
In the desolate village of Salta, the hollowed remains of my home are burning. Our sheds, our livestock, all ruined and destroyed. There lay the bloodied, unmoving bodies of my parents. My small, crying self. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew Charlene had disappeared. I could remember that pain well. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. The villagers only looked down on me with cold eyes. From the moment I was born, I should have done this. At least I wouldn't have caused Charlene all of this torment.
Darius?
The red-haired girl, Charlene, standing on the sun-kissed hill. She was there. She had always been there, protecting him, just like that day. Just like now.
You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?
What? Charlene?
The innocent little kid act, getting away with anything you wanted. I was so scared in here, Darius, and you didn't do a thing.
I didn't mean to.
I should have believed everyone else in the village. You're just a curse.
I failed. This is all my fault. Charlene, I'm so sorry. I killed her. I've only ever caused her pain.
It's okay, Darius. I forgive you.
Huh?
But I'd like to kill you, just like that day. So can I? Can I kill you, Darius?
And then Darius began to cry. He hadn't felt tears since she disappeared. The weight of his guilt finally crashed down upon him. The 13 years where all he could think about was revenge, and the nicest girl in the world that he killed. It's okay. He deserved this. He deserves to die at Charlene's hands. She must hate him for what he did, for who he's become.
Hey now, Darius. Don't look so down. No matter what anyone else thinks, you're the one who suffered the most from the Crest. It's not your fault. People who blame it on you aren't all that good themselves. You know, Darius, more than anyone else in the village, I love you the most. If anyone says anything bad to you, I'll always protect you. Believe in me.
Even now, in these lands beyond time, Charlene was still protecting him. The memories of Charlene snap Darius out of his despair, and he escapes past the conjurations of the Shadow Tower, eventually happening upon a great glowing tree with ever-expanding branches. At its base was the brilliantly blue Sword of Moonlight. It's a very important scene in the novel that gives a glimpse into Darius' psyche, and is far more enjoyable to experience than the in-game Shadow Tower. Of course, I understand that with a book, there's more dialogue and opportunity to develop character emotions. Evergrace is constrained by being an early PS2 title, redeveloped from a PS1 game under a strict time limit. There aren't nearly enough cutscenes or dialogue to even come close to the novel. I'm not saying games have to be like books. They each have their own unique way of storytelling that stand as equals. Evergrace as a game doesn't have the benefit of long descriptive paragraphs or internal monologues to deliver context, but it doesn't make much use out of its own methods of cutscenes or dialogue to match the potential this story has in the novel. Most of the game focuses on the overarching plot with Sienna and Morpheus, rather than the character backstories or internal struggles that would allow players to connect with Darius and Charlene. You know, the main characters. At this point in the game, we still don't know what happened between the two, what their relationship was, and how much time has passed besides gleaming hints from the manual. The stakes feel dramatically lowered when the player doesn't know that Charlene has been missing for 13 years. She is the sole reason that Darius grew up wanting revenge, constantly blaming himself for what happened throughout all those years. We only get vague implications that don't give actual weight to the story. There is barely any divulged character motivations or backstory to make the player invested beyond Darius cares about Charlene and caused her a lot of vague misfortune. He really wants to save her. The foundations of this backstory were present as evident by the manual that hints towards the tragedy in Darius' childhood transporting Charlene into Rubain, and how Darius grew up to become a strong swordsman to save her. But that's it. The game doesn't make use of this, doesn't expand on the bond between Darius and Charlene, definitely not aided by the fact that they're separated for nearly the entire game, and thus the player doesn't grasp the integral underlying premise of this whole plot, giving them far less reason to care. The intro monologues at the start of both character stories are too vague to give the player a sense of events on their own. Darius's only mentions his parents being killed and nothing about Charlene, while Charlene's mentions,
But a terrible thing occurred. I wanted to help him. The boy who gazed sadly at his own hands.
One could piece these things together, especially with help from the manual, which eventually culminates into what's already been established. But as a new player, none of this makes sense. And if you're playing one character fully before the other, you won't be seeing the second monologue that connects to the first. Players might not understand that the young boy is now Darius, especially with the absence of time context. This results in the story being the most interesting after the game has concluded, and the player has enough information only established upon the ending, not so much during the actual playthrough when experiencing things firsthand. I do enjoy piecing together plot lines, and Evergrace's overarching story is way more interesting through its vague mystery that's satisfying to figure out, but this isn't an effective way to establish the main emotional force of the narrative, especially when the player isn't fully invested at the start and has no understanding of the world or central plot to help them figure it out. The novel's direct approach does far better in establishing Darius and Charlene, subsequently making the entire journey more interesting and emotionally impactful. And nothing was lost because this character backstory wasn't meant to be as big of a mystery as the central plot. It was merely obfuscated from the player without any planned payoff, or poorly translated into English. There's not enough information to fully grasp Darius' childhood in-game, so there's no satisfaction to be lost by directly telling the player. All this vague presentation does is cripple the emotional weight of Evergrace for a new player, heavily dampening the potential impact of much of its scenes. There is at least a small bit of story development within the Shadow Tower in-game. At the very end, both characters fight a conjuration of twisted child Darius, who only says, which is the biggest allusion towards Darius's childhood and what happened with Charlene. Perhaps this is the manifestation of Darius's guilt that he hasn't let go of for 13 years, throughout which he's given himself the constant reminder that he killed Charlene and never given peace. Only now that he's seen her again, he's still in shock and isn't able to grasp reality until facing those imprisoned emotions of his younger ego. Defeating this memory could represent Darius finally forgiving himself for unintentionally causing Charlene to disappear all those years ago. It's an acceptable fight for Darius, but not as impactful as it would have been to confront the embodiment of his guilt in the form of Charlene. What doesn't make much sense though, with the context of this being the manifestation of the emotions Darius has held on to all this time, is that Charlene ends up fighting the very same boss at the end of the Shadow Tower as well. I understand why from a game design perspective. This is the tail end of a lengthy optional branch of the game, and I doubt many players would hate themselves enough to get this far. It would have been a lot of effort into designing a second unique boss just for this dungeon, but at the same time, it deflates the meaning of the boss to be fought twice. I think fighting Child Darius works for Charlene as well, but not for both characters simultaneously, as it dampens the impact. It feels like Child Darius isn't there for any particular reason when confronting both characters, whereas it could have meant Charlene defeating Darius's guilt or Darius confronting his own emotions. Why would the other need to accomplish the exact same thing? If Darius fought a twisted illusion of Charlene, it would have given actual meaning to Charlene's fight with Child Darius. There's already a Charlene enemy from the mirror room in her own story. Boom, easy recycling for FromSoft. Maybe it could have been made better by having both characters go through the tower together, being able to swap between Darius or Charlene, and possibly one saving the other at the end of the dungeon. I don't think anything along that line could have been done without making Evergrace a fundamentally different game though. FromSoftware would have had to axe the dual storyline to allow swapping between both characters, mixing up a lot of the gameplay and areas of Evergrace in turn. It's not as simple of a solution as it sounds, but that doesn't make its current implementation good. Having to go through this dungeon just once for every weapon is bad enough. I guess if you weren't going for all equipment, it wouldn't be so exhausting, and then you have no reason to complete it on both characters and see the final boss a second time. Still, not doing the content doesn't remove it from existence. The developers put nearly half of the game's weapons and armor in this dungeon, so they clearly anticipated players going through it multiple times, and I think after torturing oneself for this long, the player deserves more of a reward than refighting the only unique enemy in this tower. However, I don't think there was that much effort put into this area, either for time constraints or due to its optional nature. Nor were developers worried about the story implications and subsequent devaluing of the boss's meaning when designing it. Anyways, the final reward for completing the Shadow Tower is the Moonlight Sword, as you would have expected. I'm not going to comment much on the weapon because I only got it on my third playthrough while trying to 100% the items for the extra story lore it unlocks. I haven't used it in a natural environment where my stats aren't maxed out, or in any situation where I would remotely struggle with a boss. I don't think it's a worthwhile reward for the pain required to acquire it. Evergrace can be completed just fine without even touching the Shadow Tower, and I can't recommend it. Even as somebody who plays Drakengard for fun.
Why is this mission so fucking long?
Okay, alright, that's it. Yep. Are you dead? Fuck this stupid fucking game. Fuck you.
Why?
Fuck
What
you,
is the
Yoko
point?
Taro.
This is an equally traumatizing experience. The final area in the game for both characters is the Soaring Tower, and it's another instance of Charlene and Darius treading the same ground at different times as in Ceramod Hill and the Royal Commons. Charlene assembles a statue by taking off her clothes, interesting choice FromSoft, and Darius proceeds after her through the finished sculpture, this time having to color his clothes red and blue to warp through the same areas as Charlene. There's nothing new here, more of the same Evergrace puzzle mechanics, and even the required slaying of dozens of enemies to open doors or lower a bridge as seen from the Shadow Tower. Throughout Evergrace, there have been several books strewn about that give subtle hints towards the overarching story, but nothing too substantial or clear on its own. Rather, small pieces that come together only at the very end of the game to make sense of things. I haven't been covering them because the novel has been a clearer source of the same information. However, in the Soaring Tower is the Room of Knowledge, which contains the last bit of books that still don't entirely make sense on their own. The Empire is encased in a sphere. It's the will of God. Makes sense if paying attention to the intro cutscene, where Rubain is encased in a Biliana fruit. But how did Rubain get trapped in a Biliana fruit to begin with? Is it the same with all who bear the crest? The power to cut away the world? There must be some connection between her changes and the changes in this world. It is said that Morpheus sent out garrisons to neighboring villages to kidnap crest bearers for his research. That all came to an end when one village erupted in a vibrant golden light. A golden bird, a demon, rose above the crater, swathing the landscapes in rays of grace. And then, the kingdom disappeared, leaving behind the barren landscape save for the new forest of Biliana trees. The answers we seek lie at the top of the research tower, where Charlene now confronts Morpheus.
Charlene, why did you come here?
Sienna! I'm so glad to see you. You're Sienna, right?
Run! Quick! He's up to something. Stop! Morpheus, what are you doing? Trandon! Trandon!
What's that? That's not possible!
This light, it's the same as Darius.
Oh no! If this keeps up, I'm done! Here they come. I've been waiting for this.
Where is Charlene?
She's that important to you, huh? I can understand that. Thanks to her, I'm at the final stage of my experiment.
You creep.
Yes. Feel the anger. Let me see the power of your crest.
However, Darius is the one to properly defeat him. This is another fight where not upgrading many weapons will result in a grueling boss encounter. Morpheus is resistant to all elements, although doesn't seem to heal off them. He's only weak to physical attacks, but good luck hitting him when he constantly teleports across the arena and stuns the player with spells, sometimes warping away before Darius has the opportunity to hit him even once. However, with patience, Morpheus is far from the hardest boss in Evergrace, and with a hefty enough blunt weapon, he goes down pretty quickly. Sienna appears again after Morpheus's defeat.
You know too much. Humans can't change the cycle of the world.
Sienna? What? Why? I've never agreed to this for the mere convenience of demons like you, who exist simply to destroy.
Where's Trandon, Morpheus?
Where do you think? He's in a place you know all too well.
No!
Yes! He's at the land of all ends!
Charlene!
Morpheus!
No one would blame me for doing this. I'm going to die anyway. It's your move, Sienna. This is all your fault. Every last bit of it. Oh, you just had to open it, didn't you? Which one will you give up? The precious little girl? Or your very own child?
Darius, can you forgive me? I did this to you for my own selfish ways. I'll save Charlene, I promise.
Charlene!
Darius?
Yes! Charlene!
Sienna!
It's time.
There, Char.
End it.
Please, help my child. Must purify me.
According to my wishes.
Kill me before...
Crest bearer. Break of the cycle.
I can't go.
Do it.
What is going on?
What's happening, Sienna?
Sienna reverts back to her chrysalis form. The demon that transported Rubain into a Biliana fruit must now purify the world for a new cycle of prosperity. She no longer has control of her body to protect Darius and Charlene. This was her purpose all along, given by the Mother of all things. You can now freely switch between Darius or Charlene by talking to the other standing in the cell. Still not true Evergrace co-op. Each character has to kill one of the 2 final bosses, and it's ideal that Charlene goes through the far portal given her katana that makes it easier to hit flying targets. If Charlene goes in first, Darius yells,
Charlene!
Yes? What is it?
Oh, nothing.
We'll make it, I promise.
It's clear that Darius has so many words to say to Charlene after not seeing her for 13 years, and is very anxious that she's teleporting away yet again. That's why Charlene reassures him.
We'll make it, I promise.
If Darius goes first, Charlene says,
Darius,
Yes?
you've grown up.
which would be very confusing given the game doesn't explicitly say they were both separated a long time ago. The delivery of the line doesn't help much either. It sounds more like Charlene is impressed that Darius is maturing and stepping up to help Sienna, as if he never extended a hand out to others, which is probably true given how people have treated him. Instead of what I assume it actually means, being Charlene is in utter shock that the 7-year-old boy she protected is now suddenly a 20-year-old man in the short span of dilated time that Charlene has been inside the Rubain bubble. I'm surprised Charlene is so quickly accepting of this reality as opposed to novel Charlene's confusion and hesitance to treat adult Darius as the same person. But given the circumstances in game, the urgency doesn't make much room for questions.
This is the fruit that spoils the cycle. This one should have vanished so long ago. There is no salvation for fruit that doesn't ripen and fall.
The land of former Rubain lies barren and dead. Many villages claim that the Biliana trees are sucking the life out of the soil, but the Biliana is supposed to give life to the earth. It's just been stalled. The fruit of the Rubain Empire has been suspended for an unknown but lengthy amount of time, at least 100 years. Something has halted the cycle that was supposed to utilize the life energy stored in the Biliana fruit to reimburse the land, possibly Sienna and her attachment to Trandon, or her inability to save him all this time, the cycle being at an impasse. But now that Darius has intervened, whom Sienna brought into this bubble, everything can be set right. Her child can be freed from his torment, and Morpheus is no longer meddling. This is why Sienna says it's all her fault that Darius is in this situation. She was guiding him as Chrysalis, and even brought him into Rubain, detecting his crest. Sienna was able to use him while she was physically imprisoned by Morpheus, and although it ended up benefiting Darius by reuniting him with Charlene, Sienna still views her intentions as selfish, and now Darius and Charlene are stuck at the cataclysmic end of this world, where all of its energy is being siphoned into the fruit. The fight with Chrysalis is quite difficult without knowing what you're doing. She has very few windows of vulnerability, and often can't be damaged even while flying around the map with well-timed strikes. This leads the boss fight to be incredibly frustrating, up until the point you understand that Chrysalis is open for attacks right after doing the move with a long window of invincibility. It's really not well telegraphed to the player that after spawning a large energy barrier and dropping a platform into the ever-shrinking arena, that she's actually vulnerable to strike. It's really odd that this boss is invincible while doing literally nothing and can only be hit while it's charging a ranged attack rarely or during its flashiest move that signals to the player, I'm invincible right now. Your attacks will just bounce off of me. Yeah, sure, okay. At this point in the game, after Evil Cloud Strife, Massive Red Lava Man, and Morpheus, I'm tired. I don't have time to complain about this. Charlene is left to fight Trandon at the Land of All Ends, which looks quite beautiful given the purgatory implications. Trandon is a manufactured crest bearer heavily abused by Morpheus' research to the point where all his memories and feelings were extracted. He doesn't even recognize his own mother. It's a mercy to take him out, and a service to Sienna who can't do it herself. It makes more sense to me that Charlene would do this favor for Sienna, as she is more emotionally connected to her, while Darius would be the one to put down Chrysalis, as he traveled with her throughout the whole game. It also helps that Charlene has a bow that can track Trand in midair and get an occasional non-blocked shot in. However, the katana acquired through her journey has an upward arc that can hit Trandon even faster from the ground. It's less likely to be blocked, making it the ideal weapon for this encounter. The katana can be purchased at the very end of the game by Darius, but in a casual playthrough, Charlene will have already obtained this weapon and possibly upgraded it, making this fight far less frustrating than Chrysalis.
Are you okay? Sienna?
Thank you. I saved Charlene thanks to you. All because of your help.
Thank you, Darius. If the cycle permits, we'll meet again someday. For now, goodbye.
Sienna! Oh no, Sienna!
With her dying breath, Sienna transports Darius and Charlene outside of Rubain before it collapses. Now on an old cliff in the former kingdom, two trees, almost shaped like birds, stand proudly. There they stand together in solemn silence, the red-haired girl and the boy with the crest, on the hill where sunbeams shine from the sky. So what the hell was that about anyways? The cycle is rather vague, though not undecipherable in-game, and I already used some information from the novel to help better describe what's actually happening during the final chapter. There have been hints throughout the game about a cycle, and one can guess that this brings an end to Rubain, but not exactly the true purpose behind it. Giving credit where it's due, Evergrace sets up the mystery of why Rubain is separated from the rest of the world, the true nature of the Biliana trees, and the Crest all quite well. There is enough information given to the player for them to mostly understand things when all the pieces come together. It's at least much better execution of the narrative than Darius and Charlene's connected backstory. The final chapter is still rather confusing, but gives the player the tools to speculate on the true meaning of Evergrace's story, until achieving 100% equipment on both characters, which unlocks a clear and lengthy description of the central plot. Personally, I would prefer all of this to subtly present itself during the game, as this feels more like a band-aid fix for not introducing enough dialogue or subtext that allows this narrative to form naturally throughout a playthrough. Yes, in retrospect, these slides make the plot far clearer, but undermines the intentional vagueness of the game's storytelling, possibly to satiate confused players. If they could suspend the player's agency in discovering the story for themselves here, then there's nothing that should have been stopping the developers from clearly divulging Darius and Charlene's backstory in the same manner. I'm not saying this is strictly a bad addition, since without it, Evergrace on its own would barely make any sense, but it does heavily detract from the rest of Evergrace's storytelling when the problem could have been addressed more subtly throughout the in-game text that could make the conclusion more impactful in the moment rather than significantly after the fact. Since 100%ing all equipment takes a long time through the Shadow Tower, and it's highly unlikely that a new player would even know that Charlene can get into the dungeon without looking up a guide. The lore books throughout the game were decent enough on their own and give enough bits of information to get a general idea, but not full scope of the plot. I wish there were more of them, or they were longer than a few sentences, to really give a sense of Rubain, its history, and all the otherworldly things Morpheus was involved in. For instance, we don't know anything about the Mother of All Things, that is implicated with the Crest and the Cycle through Red Breeze's power and Sienna's bird form, but our only means of truly understanding this lies in the novel once again. Charlene is ultimately imprisoned by Morpheus, regardless of prior events at the Colosseum, and Darius ventures to the top of the soaring tower to save her, just like in the game. The confrontation with Morpheus involves more characters, and Charlene similarly writhing in pain in her cell, eventually culminating in Morpheus straight up dying as opposed to teleporting away. Sienna still morphs into her chrysalis form, however Trandon changes alongside her. Despite having an imitation Crest, he's granted the same powers as Sienna in the end. Darius too gets swept up in rays of golden light, as the Mother of all things demands for the cycle to conclude. The god sweeps Darius out of the tower, into the skies above, and a realm of memory. She describes a tale of one Crest bearer, who upon her whole tribe being killed, transforms into a golden wolf through the crest. As she danced through the air, golden streaks of light followed, blanketing the old, dead land. The people, the towns, and the land itself all disappeared alongside the wolf into a single spherical fruit, that of the Biliana. Upon slowly descending and touching the barren ground, a forest of Biliana trees abruptly sprout where civilization formerly stood. White flowers bloom all across the forest, and from their petals, swept up by the wind, new life springs forth. Trees, birds, all the seeds of future humans and animals are sown. This same process was happening to Rubain at this very moment, and now all that remains is Darius and Charlene atop the soaring tower, with all life below being subsumed by golden fog. Sienna cannot bring herself to purify her child Trandon, and therefore Darius, with his own crest, finalizes the cycle, ripening the Rubain fruit. Golden light filled the skies, shining as bright as the sun, and everything melted away into nothing. Back on the continent of Edinburgh, the fruit dangling from the great Biliana tree finally snaps away after 100 years, dropping onto the desolate earth and revitalizing the landscape. Darius used his powers to dampen the flames he set onto the grand tree in his earlier path of blind revenge. He realized now that the Biliana wasn't the cause of the rotting land, and that he never had been cursed to bring misfortune. Rather, the crest was simply a way for the Mother of all things to see the world. But when crest bearers were subject to deep pain and despair, it was the Mother who granted them powers to purify everything around them. A power granted to those who wanted everything to disappear. A saving grace. Darius no longer had to hide his crest. With Charlene now safe back in the real world, Darius and Charlene settled on the land of former Rubain, nurturing the soil that quickly flourished under the Biliana and Darius's blessing. Over time, the humble home Darius and Charlene shared drew in settlers who wanted to live with the Biliana, and thus, the former kingdom became the peaceful village of New Rubain. Now that the Biliana trees were seen as a symbol of life, Darius didn't need to worry about protecting them, instead turning his focus towards future crest bearers that might face the same upbringing Darius had. The prejudice around the crest was still causing persecution. Even now, no matter where you went, the people born with the crest still had cold eyes and bitter feelings towards them. That loneliness would lead to despair. The cycle of fear would start again. Thus, Darius traveled along the continent to search for more crest bearers, so the tragedy that befell him wouldn't happen to anybody else. Charlene, however, wouldn't let him go alone. She wanted to be by his side and protect him, even though he was a lot older than last time she said that. The boy with the crest and the girl with fiery hair were finally reunited. They ventured together across the vast continent, away from the canopy where sunbeams streamed through the grand Biliana trees. My entire perspective on Evergrace shifted after reading the novelization. It turns the confusing and awkwardly executed plot of the game into a beautiful story. It might be a little unfair to judge the shortcomings of the game against what a different medium manages after the game's release, but that's not my point for bringing it up throughout this video. My intention was to show the potential that Evergrace had, and how good the story actually is when taking the time to dive deep into it. Despite being somewhat clunky and frustrating to complete, Evergrace is a beautiful game at its core, not just aesthetically, as this is one of the few Fromsoftware games so far that made me feel something. Armored Core 1 may have handled the obfuscated narrative far better, turning it into one of the most satisfying early FromSoft stories that Master of Arena builds upon into greater heights, the PS1 Kingsfield trilogy may have the compounding timeline of its 3 games to create an epic tale across bloodlines, but in just one game, Evergrace has made me feel for its characters, and be intrigued enough to grind through the abysmal Shadow Tower and read a book for once to fully understand its narrative. I truly believe this is one of the best FromSoftware stories, at least before 2000, but it definitely needs the companion piece of the novel to fully appreciate. Evergrace on its own is just an okay game, with some charming systems and beautiful distinct visual design in its characters and environments, plus the eclectic and bizarre soundtrack Koto Hoshino created that perfectly complements this strange game. The story though. The story brings everything together and makes the experience worthwhile despite the average gameplay. I didn't feel hollow after completing Evergrace through the vague and mysterious ending. Rather, I was left with a great amount of intrigue that eventually culminated into a very satisfying conclusion that persisted long after the game ended. Much like how Armored Core 1's story was enjoyable to piece together, Evergrace also has an additional degree of emotional satisfaction that stands it out from other FromSoftware games I've played up until this point. Ultimately, I don't hold the frailty of Evergrace's story execution on one particular thing. The English version lacks much context and takes a while to compound into anything comprehensible. The Japanese version seems to have a little more dialogue, but I lack a proper frame of reference to understand if it's truly handled better or not. What I do know is localization is never perfect, especially in this era. Agetech did not have any in-house translators, per the Jeremy Kaufman interview by We Review Every PS2 Game. Oh god.
And this particular game, the translation was a train wreck. There were no translators working at Agetech, there were no voice actors working at Agetech. It was all outsourced. What we got back was just a mess.
It's no surprise that a subtle story in Japanese would lose most of its underlying details, and the rough translation job likely crippled a lot of the script. However, I don't speak Japanese. I can't quantify how bad the English translation is in comparison, only judge how poorly it conveys the game's story on its own. That is the flaw of this video being primarily focused on the English version, but it would take exceptionally longer for me to retranslate original Evergrace. Do you know how long this shit's taken already? The game went through at least a few rewrites during development as well, offering an explanation for all of the background ideas that never get expanded upon, such as Edinburgh, the continent Darius resides on, and its conflicting villages. Some of these topics were likely written into the story at some point, then scrapped, but they remained a part of the world that the writers would build upon in the preceding drafts. The Mother of All Things was also intended to play a larger role in the narrative in early development, where the name Evergrace was decided. That influence can still be felt, even though she's not fully in-game, so I wouldn't chop everything down into bad execution from developers or localizers. It's a combination of a large-scoped story, half translated into another language that can't convey as much information in the same amount of characters or speech. While I don't know effectively any of Japanese Evergrace's script, I do know that inevitably dialogue had to be trimmed down. There were also scenes from the base game that were cut as well. Originally, Charlene's intro was going to be more in-depth and mention more about Darius, but this ended up making the sequence too long. The game's director ultimately decided to omit scenes that broke the game's pacing and leave it up for the player to read in between the lines. And that's exactly how Evergrace conveys its story. It's just unfortunate that it's far more difficult to read in between the lines while actively playing the game. The novel is able to take all of the elements that make up Evergrace and convey them more clearly. It was able to use underdeveloped background ideas such as the Mother of All Things and incorporate them into the plot for a more complete story, while its medium allowed the reader to enjoy the slower emotional or expository scenes that didn't break its pacing or feel out of place as they would for a game. Not to mention the ease of reading in between the lines when all the words are literally laid out for the reader to be studied and reread, unlike the linear storytelling nature of the game. This is why there's such a great contrast between roughly the same narrative between Evergrace and its novelization. It's not that the game tells its narrative poorly, it's that the novel was much better equipped at handling the same story. It's important to say, as Evergrace concludes, that even though this game is weighed down by its execution and other external factors, it's still worth appreciating and analyzing. Evergrace is more flawed than any other game I've covered so far, and yet it persists. It still tried to experiment with a new storytelling method, and arguably succeeded despite the crushing weight of an entire rework of the game to a new console generation. It's a miracle this game exists at all, let alone get a sequel. It may be an incongruous mess of shallow gameplay and mishandled narrative, but still tells an emotional story, and manages to be a wholly unique experience amongst the vast sea of bold, artistic, and experimental games in this era. It wouldn't be so interesting if the voice acting were just fine, the story understandable, the character models unjagged, and the goddamn flickering of the screen being gone. Perfect things do not exist in this world, and if the flaws of Evergrace do not make it beautiful, they at least create greater contrasts against the few things this game does exceptionally well. You could say, that's its saving grace. I wouldn't have been able to appreciate the novel if not for the translation work of Taptrope. Although it is an old project and technically incomplete, I would still recommend reading it for those interested in diving deeper into Evergrace. Even though it reads more like an annotated and abridged translation at times, the emotional scenes still ring through, and it delivers more information than Evergrace as a game does. So thank you to Elena for your hard work in translating this novel, and for diligently archiving many pieces of Evergrace media and history. It's from the work of people like you that I can make these videos the best they can possibly be. If not for the art scans, I'd have far less material to use for extra visuals, and without the archived interviews, I would be completely in the dark about certain elements of development for these early games. The associated Evergrace interviews and dev notes definitely helped inform me about the PS1 beta stage of Evergrace, particularly the translated Evergrace OST liner notes that Elena also published. There is, in fact, another Evergrace novel bridging the gap between the release of the first game and its prequel. The Those Who Bear the Crest light novel was published in 2000. Both books were released in the same year, but where the novelization by Kayako Shimomura expands on the storyline of the base game and keeps itself relatively in that sphere, Those Who Bear the Crest by Mie Takase is more of its own story, a prequel to Evergrace and companion story to Evergrace 2. I figured it would be better to cover the light novel alongside the second game, as this analysis is already long enough as is, and it would overall fit better with Evergrace 2. All sources and extra Evergrace media will be linked in the description. I've retroactively added bonus material to each individual Fromsoftware video for those who want to look at all of the magazine scans, websites, or printed material I've compiled while doing research. A big thanks to all of the people I've been working with to help make this video possible. This is by far my largest and most ambitious project on a single game, even eclipsing the Armored Core double feature that was monumental to make in itself. Thank you to Goyaba for the Red Breeze fight scene, Elena for the pivotal Shadow Tower confrontation, Angel Meadows for voicing Charlene in that same scene. She's an upcoming voice actress who I pulled off the side of the street, slapped a script about a character she's never heard of in a game she's never played to get the full, authentic, outsourced age-tech experience. Thank you to Flaky, Gitai, and Wright for additional background voices during the same Shadow Tower scene. For the Coliseum art, we have... don't make me say that. AI Pussy. Thank you, computer fucker. And finally, thank you to patrons Rouge Eclipser and Zap, and old members Stravenger for their continuous monetary support. All of the artists and actors that helped me will have their socials linked below. Please support them as well if you found their work in this video to be compelling. Seriously, without all of you, I wouldn't have been able to show off Evergrace at its best, or deliver as emotional of a Shadow Tower scene as I wanted. And without all of the viewers watching this far and supporting the Fromsoftware series, I wouldn't have been so invested to make a feature-length Cryville video. I mean, I would still continue covering every FromSoft game regardless, but the support helps a lot with long-term motivation, especially for a video that took this long to make. I would likely not be going all in like this on a mega project without the support. Thank you all so much. please indulge me in another few minutes of your time, since this Evergrace video took me 5 months to make. I'm not exaggerating. I've spent nearly every day for the past 5 months putting in at least 1 to 2, sometimes upwards of 6 to even 9 hours on productive days into this video. It was a lot of work compiling both the game and novel together into an understandable script, properly conveying the story, recording 5.5 hours of voiceover, manually trimming that down into roughly the hour and 40 minutes of final takes, not to mention displaying all of this information in an interesting way. I don't even have a proper count of raw hours spent on this project, but it has to be at least 250. So please, if you found this video entertaining, share it with somebody who'd also find it interesting, because my channel has very little reach. Don't share it with a friend though, they'll probably stop talking to you. Or leave a comment letting me know your favorite part of the video, even something as simple as the audio mixing. I spent a lot of effort on that too. I want to make more informationally dense videos like this one. I even wanted to make some documentaries, like real ones. I'm not so conceited to call this a documentary despite its length. Are you kidding me? Of course I'm going to continue the FromSoft series, and it will be my main priority, and sharing these videos, commenting, or watching older entries is a great way to help me reach global Cryville saturation, so that you can get more videos. As for what's next, I might go back to Echo Knight and wrap up the remaining PS1 Fromsoftware games that I skipped over, including Sprig and Lunarverse, although I'll go overboard on the research for that one, and it'll take some time. You'll see what I mean when it ends up being 2 hours long. Echo Knight is not as expansive as Evergrace, but just as rich in story. I'll probably end up covering that while settling down from this massive, overwhelming project. The wait will hopefully not be 9 months. Thank you for watching, and Merry Christmas.